You know, we choose and place plants in our landscapes for their aesthetic qualities, and we want them to behave certain ways. Sometimes a lot of fuzz and a lot of flop is really appropriate. In other situations, we want them to be a little bit better managed. We're going to talk a little bit today about how to manage those plants that flop and discuss which ones tend to flop the most. I want to start with grasses, whether they are ornamental grasses or many of our natives, such as little blue stem. This is a perfect example of one of the grasses that flops if a couple of different conditions exist. First off, knowing that this plant likes sun and likes it dry would suggest that its growth habit is going to be different if you put it in a situation where it gets a little bit too much shade and a little bit or a lot too much water. That causes the top growth to be heavy, the plant falls over. We no longer have it contributing to the landscape in the ways in which we wanted it. Same thing will happen with our switch grasses, our native love grass, and even to a lesser extent, some of our other ornamental grasses. We don't typically expect balloon flowers to be one of those plants that flops, but again, given conditions that might include too much water during a certain season and damage to the crowns, in this case probably vole damage, what happens is the base of that plant becomes weakened, the top is really heavy, and the plant begins to fall over. Asters and sneezeweed or Helen's flower are other examples of plants that may have such top-heavy growth when they're in flower, especially if they have an unbranched stem, that unless you manage them properly, they may flop during the season and open up in the center as well. Plants that have been in place too long may actually exhaust their environment, and they flop along the edges because the center is completely died out. Siberian iris is one example. Sedums will do the same thing. So what exactly do we do about these plants that want to flop or lodge, whether it is genetics, environmental, or age? We have some options available to us. The first of those is to look at the environment and make sure that you have selected a plant for its growing conditions, or modify those conditions. Stop watering if it's a plant that really doesn't want water. If the landscape has changed over time and you have too much shade for plants that are going to flop in shade, move the plants, prune the tree if you need to do that. If the plant is old, go ahead and dig and divide at the proper time, making sure that you take good pieces of the old plant. Again, put those into the right environment. You can also pinch or cut back by 1/3 for certain plants. Sedum is one of those that if you cut it back by about 1/3 during the early part of the summer, it will actually stay shorter, bloom a little bit closer down into the crown of the plant, and won't get those top-heavy floppy stems. One of the main things to understand, however, is there are certain perennials that if you do cut them back like that, they are not going to branch and bloom. And of course, the other option is to go ahead and cage. And the beauty of caging, if you do it early in the season, and again, if those environmental conditions are correct, is that the cage sits, the plant grows through it, everything really looks the way you want it to look, and you haven't had to deal with cutting or moving those plants.